in the year ahead, whatever it may bring.
Tony Abbott did not look amused there. Well, joining me now to look at the week and the year, the Shadow Parliamentary Secretary Matt Thistlethwaite and Parliamentary Secretary Paul Fletcher. Thank you both very much for your time. Okay. Paul Fletcher, I'll start with you. Joe Hockey on the front page of many of the papers once again today, admitting that there's unrest, admitting that people in the government don't like him. What's going on?
What's going on is that Joe is leading the very important work of getting the budget back under control. We said that that was our key priority. Joe's been absolutely on the front line in doing a terrific job. Over 75% of the key budget measures are already through the Senate. At the same time, Joe, of course, has also been taking a leadership role globally with the G20 this year. So Joe's been doing a terrific job, and that work is so important because of the budget chaos we inherited from the previous Labor government. Australia on track to a gross government debt of $667 billion.
Not everyone in the party, though, sees that Joe Hockey is doing a good job, according to the reports out over the past couple of days. Why is there this dissent, and why is this internal criticism being directed at him?
Well, look, I'm happy to speak for my own view and the view of the people I speak to in the party room. Joe is recognised as doing a very important job, doing the job well, bringing to bear almost 20 years of parliamentary experience, and absolutely focused on getting the budget back under control. And look, it's difficult work. It's difficult work, and we're up against an opposition which is profoundly irresponsible and has already, for example, said it's not going to support $5 billion worth of its own savings measures that it took to the last election. It claimed those savings when Chris Bowen was Treasurer, and now it's walked away from them. So that's the kind of irresponsibility that we're seeing from, sadly, the Labor opposition. Well, Joe Hockey is leading the fight to deliver Australia the kind of fiscal responsibility that we need.
Matt, just on that point, it's easy for you guys to sit back and watch, but Joe Hockey does have a very difficult job in government. It's an important one as well, trying to get the economy back on track. How does Labor explain blocking over $5 billion of savings that you supported before the last election?
Well, the irony of Tony Abbott claiming in the Parliament this week that Labor were being wreckers and that we were being negative is unbelievable. This was the man that in government said no to everything. Labor's taken a constructive approach to looking and working with the government on responsible budget measures, and that's proof in the fact that we've passed $20 billion worth of savings measures. But what we won't be involved in, measures that hurt people, particularly the vulnerable within our community. So the GP co-payment, the changes to pensions, the changes to family tax benefits, and importantly, the higher education reforms. We're not going to be involved in hurting vulnerable people within our community. That's why Joe Hockey is struggling. That's why he can't get his budget measures through the Parliament. Joe Hockey's the sort of bloke, David, that wears his emotions on his face. And he's actually prided himself on that in his period in the Parliament. And you and I know Joe's not a happy man at the moment. It shows on his face in the Parliament. He's under a lot of pressure, and I think it's a symptom of the fact that this government came into office without a plan, and we're seeing it now with respect to the budget. A lot of this, what's in the budget, was not disclosed to the Australian people before the election, and there's very much chaos and disorganisation because they're making a lot of this up as they go, and Australians are suffering for that.
I just want to take you back, though, to the question, the $5 billion itself. That's not related to the GP co-payment, the higher education. These are things that you took to the last election. Now you're blocking them. So if you're saying that you're not going to support unfair measures, what are you saying? You took unfair measures to the election? How do you explain it?
Well, Labor's got a set of principles that we took to the election, and we've taken a responsible approach, we think, in opposition to many of these savings measures.
The $5 billion specifically?
Well, they were a part of an architecture that included reforms like Gonski, that included other government programs that have been wiped out by this government. So the whole notion of the budget has completely changed, and a lot of what this government is now doing is based on the Commission of Audit, which Labor never supported and was never disclosed to the Australian public prior to the election. So we think that we're taking a responsible approach on the issue of tax reform. We've said that we'll sit down with the government and look at responsible measures. When Labor conducted a tax summit when we were in government, the opposition refused to show up. Tony Abbott would not allow any of his ministers to participate in a national discussion about the future of taxation reform in this country, and that says everything about the approach that he took in government, in opposition.
Paul Fletcher, just on the Commission of Audit, it seems Joe Hockey's supporters have hit back in the Australian newspaper today, blaming the Prime Minister's office for that crucial decision to shelve the Commission of Audit for some 10 weeks. That delayed the case being made for significant economic reform, and some within the coalition are saying that made Joe Hockey's job so much harder. In hindsight, was that a bad decision to delay that Commission of Audit so that the case couldn't be made?
I want to first put this in context, because Matt says we didn't have a plan. We came to government with a very clear plan. We said we would stop the boats, and the boats are stopping. We said we'd stop the carbon tax, stop the mining tax. We've repealed both of those taxes despite people saying it couldn't be done. We are building the roads of the 21st century. Here in Sydney, for example, WestConnex, and we stand ready to support the East-West link if the new Victorian government should change its mind. And getting the budget back under control, we made it very clear that was an absolute priority. Now, the Commission of Audit was about doing the detailed policy work as to look at the range of options. It was a report to government, not a report of government, but it was about putting the options on the table, and we've drawn from those options in the budget. And of course, we've spent the year working to get budget measures through. And again, I make the point, some 3/4 of those measures are through the Senate, and we're working systematically on other measures.
Would it have been easier, though, if Joe Hockey had had a bit more time to make the case that there was significant pain to come?
Look, the important thing is the detailed work of implementation and advocacy. And you've seen in area after area that we've been doing that systematically throughout the year, right up, for example, until the very last day of the Parliament sitting with, for example, Immigration Minister Scott Morrison taking measures through the Parliament in relation to temporary protection.
Do you concede something needs to be reset? There needs to be either reshuffle or change within the Prime Minister's office, or something needs to change?
What needs to be reset, Dave. What needs to be reset is the grossly irresponsible attitude of Bill Shorten and the opposition, because they're playing a short-term political game. They appear to have no interest in Australia's longer-term national interests, and we've just heard Matt completely fail to give any adequate answer to why it was that they took $5 billion of savings for the last election, and now they've just dumped them. They've refused to pass their own savings. Now, this is a party that left Australia with 6 successive years of yawning gaps of deficit, and we are now doing the hard, necessary work of turning that around. And that's what Joe Hockey is leading, with the full support of the Prime Minister and the full support of the Liberal and National Party.
The mid-year budget update's coming in a few weeks. It won't be pretty. We imagine that billions of dollars will be added to the deficit. Now, to fix it, you either make cuts or you raise taxes. That's a simplistic view, obviously, but Matt Thistlethwaite, if you're opposed to the cuts, you either raise taxes or rack up more debt. Isn't that a given?
Well, we've said that there's other ways to look at bringing the budget back on a more sustainable footing, and that includes things like high-end superannuation and removing some of the concessions there. This government's wiped out about $7 billion worth of revenue in getting rid of the carbon price. They've got rid of the minerals resource rent tax. The fact that Joe Hockey's in this position...
you'd bring those taxes back?
The fact that Joe Hockey's in this position that he's in at the moment is a symptom of the fact that they're disorganised and chaotic. One minute he's talking down the economy and saying that we need to make savings measures. The next minute he's asking people to go out and spend, that everything's rosy, that we're growing, the jobs are being created. It's a disorganised message to the Australian public, and it's a symptom of the fact that they don't know what they're doing, David. They're chaotic. I don't think Joe Hockey's got any idea of what his plans are for the Australian economy, and he's making this up as he goes.
Is the message jumbled at the moment, Paul?
Well, I think we've had a very clear and consistent set of messages. As the Prime Minister said in Parliament yesterday, or on Thursday, we had a very clear set of commitments, and we've ticked off, we've completed repeal of the carbon tax and the mining tax, for example, and we're very clear repairing the budget getting the budget back under control has been a priority, continues to be a priority. It's a central priority.
But Paul, the cuts that you've made have smashed consumer confidence.
Matt, tell us what your plan is. Tell us what your plan is, because Deloitte Access Economics, Chris Richardson of Deloitte Access Economics said this week there is only one party that has got a plan to get the economy, to get the budget back under control.
Let's look at immigration.
You don't have a plan. There is no plan.
Let's look at immigration. This week, a win for Scott Morrison and the government in this area again. He got the numbers in the Senate to amend the Migration Act. Matt, why did Labor vote against amendments that will see some 1,500 people released from detention on Christmas Island and will also give work rights to many of the 30,000 asylum seekers in the backlog in limbo currently here in Australia?
Well, the spin that Scott Morrison's put on this is misleading. Labor's approach is if someone is found to be a genuine refugee and they're processed, they should be released from detention and put on a permanent visa. We don't agree with temporary protection visas. They're not in the spirit of the convention to which Australia is a signatory, and that's why we voted against it in the Parliament. We've been consistent on that since they were first floated by the Howard government.
But as Ricky Muir said, it was a tough decision for him. He was faced, in his eyes, between a bad decision or a bad outcome and a worse outcome. Why wouldn't you go for the lesser of two evils if that's what you think?
Because you don't need temporary protection visas to get people out of detention and children out of detention. You just need to begin processing them. And when Scott Morrison...
So as a result, you vote for them to stay in detention?
When Scott Morrison came to government, he stopped processing people. He told the Immigration Department to stop processing people. That's not in the spirit of the convention to which Australia is a signatory. He should have done what every other country that's a signatory to the convention does, and that's assess people in accordance with the convention. If there's no issues with their identity and health, then they should be processed and granted a permanent visa. That's the Labor's approach.
Paul Fletcher, was it fair to link the release of asylum seekers to all the other measures? Why did it have to be one package or nothing? If it was about releasing people from detention? Or
David, there is no policy area where Labor left a more chaotic mess than border protection. Labor had several different policies when in government, and they left a legacy caseload of some 30,000 people whose claims had not yet been processed. Bear in mind that we said we would restore temporary protection visas. We took that policy to the election. We were elected on the basis of that policy. We've just delivered on that commitment. But what we've also got here is the Safe Haven Enterprise Visa. So this will give people a chance to be working. And we are now getting on with processing those nearly 30,000 people who are left in limbo. So, look, this is a very constructive way forward, which is going to see some 1,500 people out of detention, as the Minister said yesterday, work rights for some 25,000 people, and the refugee intake is rising to 18,750 people.
Yeah, Matt Thistlethwaite, on the Safe Haven Enterprise visas, is that something that Labor sees as a pathway to permanent residency in Australia? Is that a positive step that this government has made?
Well, we don't know, because Scott Morrison hasn't released any of the details. He said that it could be a pathway to permanency, but they'll do further work on it and release some of the details into the future. So
we've said bit of detail there. We know they get work rights for 3.5 years. They work in regional areas. At the end of that time, they can apply for other work visas.
But they haven't released the details on whether it becomes permanent at the end of it or not. And that's a key detail that Labor said we're willing to have a look at. And consult further with the government on whether or not it's a good proposal.
Does Labor now concede that turning boats around has had an impact on the flow of asylum seeker vessels to?
Well, Labor's view is that the regional resettlement arrangement has been effective in reducing the number of people getting on boats, and the
government agrees with that.
Reduction,
but specifically on the turnbacks.
Well, turnbacks have caused massive problems with our relationship with Indonesia, and that's why Labor's been opposed to it. There's evidence that it's not good for the Australian Navy that are involved in it, and that evidence has been given to estimates hearings. So based on that advice, Labor's been opposed to them. But
what's the impact on the number of people?
If the Abbott opposition had have agreed to the Malaysia solution when they were in opposition, I think you would have seen a reduction in boats much earlier.
Final word, Paul Fletcher.
Look, it's been, I think, a constructive and productive year for the Abbott government. Of course, there have been ups and downs. That's the nature of government. But we're dealing with a set of tough issues. That's what we are charged with doing. We're honoured to be doing it, and we've made solid progress, but there's more to do.
Matt Thistlethwaite.
it's been chaotic and disorganised, and I think it's in this fact. Julie Bishop wants the Prime Minister's job. Andrew Robb's looking after Julie Bishop. Joe Hockey doesn't want his job. David Johnson can't do his job, and Scott Morrison wants everyone's job.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
See you soon. After the break, Sam Maiden from the Sunday Telegraph will go over the year that has been and give the government a mark. Stay with us.